just commenting on, but hopefully everybody had a chance to look at the minutes. They were pretty short and sweet, to the point. Appreciate you doing that for us, Kathleen. Thought it was a good job, but don't know if anybody had any feedback on those minutes or not. If you guys are comfortable, I'd love to get a motion and a second to approve those.
I make a motion.
Thank you, Ron. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Robert. Anyone opposed to approving these? Okay, we will consider that approved. Thank you very much, Kathleen. Sharika, I think you were on, heard your name earlier. I know you wanted to give an update on the 5-year plan, so to speak. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. So each year, the city works on preparing a 5-year consolidated housing and community development plan. This plan is due to HUD. This year is due in May 2023, and it will be for the years of 2024 to 2028. So with this plan, we have to develop a 5-year plan, and each year we'll complete an annual action plan that will tell how we are utilizing funds. It's mainly the funds that you guys here vote on. So our Community Development Grant Fund, CDBG, you vote on our ESG, Emergency Solutions Grant, as well as home, and we're including the COC funds as well. Every year we receive these federal funds, and we use them to address homelessness, affordable housing, community services, and also to support small businesses. So this is just to let you guys know that on Monday, there will be a few press releases coming from the city. These press releases will include community meeting times and links to surveys to get feedback. And we welcome you to also, if you want, attend one of the community meetings, also to complete that survey. So just letting you guys know as a heads up that this is going out as a huge marketing push on Monday, and that's what it's for.
Sharika, is it possible for you to send those links to me and I can share them with the COC?
Yes, when marketing gives them to me, I'll send them right to you. We just wrapped everything up today, so I'll send those to you once they're ready.
Okay.
Sharika, this is Cynthia. How long do you have to complete the surveys?
So it would be 30 days. So the surveys will be available for 30 days. They will end on March 18th at midnight. And the community meetings are held in March. So we wanted them to end after the community had time to come out and do the community meetings. At the community meetings, there will be representatives from various departments that are affected by these funds. So Parks and Recs, the Men, Women, Business Inclusion Department, the Small Business Department, of course, the Community Development Department, Human Relations. So various city employees and individuals affected by these funds will be there.
So is there any advance notice that this is coming? Because this seems like awfully tight turnaround.
So that's what the media release is for. So a media release will start Friday going to Monday. So the media release, social media release, and everything is what's going to be happening over the next few weeks. And they're due in May. So there'll be another community plan, community public meeting after the one in March.
Okay. Okay.
So this is just the first part, and then we'll come back again and do another part in April.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any groups specifically that you're asking to do the survey?
No, we're asking all residents, community partners, local stakeholders, and businesses to complete the survey. Just to guide, this is the time for them to give us our voice on how to use these funds that we get every year. So everyone's welcome to complete it. It specifically asks about needs in your community or needs you see around the city of Winston-Salem, so that we're able to guide how the funds will be used over the next 5-year plan.
Okay.
So I'm assuming it's an email that can be shared.
Yes, there will be an email that will be shared. It will be a Facebook post that can be shared. It will be on the city's spotlight page, which is as soon as you go onto the city's page, It will also be, the marketing department has it, various locations. So it'll be widely shared.
What kind of response did you get the last time you did it?
I was not here 5 years ago, so that would be something that I need to check into. I know previously we had consultants doing this, so it wasn't, there wasn't city staff present and presenting and things like that as it is now. So it's a little different this year. The city is actually taking on the task of doing this and going into the community and completing these meetings.
So what's your expectations? How many would you like to get back?
Surveys, I'm hoping to get thousands back. I mean, we would like to, everyone wants their opinion heard, so this is the time. So I would like to get thousands back, but I can't say what we will get back. I'm hoping that we get a lot back so that we can have input on the needs in various areas of Winston-Salem.
Hopefully that'll be the case.
Fingers crossed.
Appreciate those questions, Cynthia. Good questions. All right, any other questions on this topic for Sharika? All right, well, we will pivot then to the next topic. Just had the pit count. I think Kathleen, you were going to provide an update on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know we had a successful point in time count on the night of the 25th and early morning of the 26th. We had been off for 2 years because of COVID, not using volunteers to do it. So this year we were back out on the streets with volunteers. We had several repeat volunteers come back, but also lots of new folks. We had about 56 people on our 9 p.m. to midnight shift. And then we had 9 individuals for our 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. shift. So those numbers will not be ready to be released for quite a while. We're still deduplicating and looking at the data and collecting it all. It was City with Dwellings was kind enough to host us this year out of their new location. So it was a good spot for us to use. And I can share that we were able to bring in 6 folks off the streets into shelter that night that wanted to come in. So yeah, so we're back at it, and I feel like it was pretty successful for returning to it after 2 years. So I'm interested to see though what the final numbers do show compared to what we have done the last 2 years without using volunteers.
I know you said it'll be sometime, you think next month or the month after?
I'd probably say it's going to be a couple of months before that, because they have to collect data. The city collects all of it to get the report ready to go to HUD, and they have to get it from the shelters and all the day programs and the soup kitchen. So there's a lot of scrubbing of the data that has to be done. So it usually takes a couple of months to get it all finished and ready to be presented. And we'll certainly share those numbers once they are ready to be released. But it was good. Sharika came out. It was her first count here in Forsyth County with us, and Shantae Parker from Bethesda Center.
It's not my first.
Here in Winston.
No, it's
second
not.
Forsyth.
Don't forget, Sharika was here before she went away.
Yes, before I worked in
That's
California, I
right.
was here.
My
Yeah.
apologies. My apologies. Her first back in this role that she's in. So, and she was kind enough to do both shifts. So, and Shantae Parker from Bethesda Center is a repeat volunteer, and she's great to have and leads a team of usually new folks that have never done it. And so we definitely couldn't do this without the volunteers. We did attempt to use a digital platform this year for the surveys with the folks we encountered. That didn't go off quite as well as we hoped. So we're going to work on that and tweak that for next year. But it was interesting. I think we probably had more 55 to 65 age range than we did younger folks, and they just didn't want to use that digital platform. So But we'll work on that again for next year. So any questions about the point in time count? All right, thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. All right. Oh, Andrea, it looks like you've got a few things here to give us an update on. I'm showing
do.
final vet goal numbers first.
So I will apologize. When we set the agenda, I didn't process that this meeting, which is the third Thursday of the month, was coming before the third Tuesday of the month meeting, which is next Tuesday, which is when we'll get the data from the VA.
I actually have it, Andrea.
Oh, do you?
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me,
You want to share your screen?
well, I have to,
Okay. Well,
Get
you
it.
find that. I'll do the, we can do that at the end and I can share my screen.
Okay. So we'll come back to that then, Kathleen, give you time to pull it up.
yeah.
All right. You want to move then, Andrea, to exits to permanent housing?
Yep. Okay. So I think you can all see my screen now.
We can.
You can't?
We can.
No, we can.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right. So this is just a look at our system performance based on the data from the last federal fiscal year, which was 10/1/21 to 9/30/22. And we're going to focus today on exits. But just to give you an overview, during those 12 months, we served 1,177 households, representing 1,491 people. Now, this is the whole system. We're not looking at a specific program at this point. And as a system, the average day that someone was homeless was 110. So some of those folks may have been homeless for 2 days. Some of those folks have been homeless for 300-400 days. But the average is at 110. So our goal that we set for ourselves when we did the strategic plan was for this average to be under 30. When we set the goal, our average was around, I think, 45, maybe. So it's gone up a lot during the pandemic. And a lot of that has to do with policies that we changed during the pandemic, focusing on keeping people safe as opposed to getting them housed. Also, we'll talk some about looking at our exits, what those look like, and some of the challenges we're having helping people get out of homelessness. So this is a map of the system from HUD's point of view using this data. So this is where I'm going to spend most of my time today. So you can see here on the far left of the screen, this is those 1,133 households that came into the system. Of those households, 83% of them followed this path, and their first stop in the system was shelter. 12% of the households, their first stop, you can see, was a rapid rehousing program. So this most likely are people who came directly from street homelessness into a rapid rehousing program. And then we have less than 1% of the folks come from wherever they're coming from into a permanent supportive housing project. 4% of people came into transitional housing projects, and less than 1% goes to all other pathways. So in the dark purple boxes, you can see the number of households that represents. So 943 households went to shelter. With our shelter, with folks going into just shelter, their average length of stay was 71 days per household. So a household could be a single adult entering into a single adult shelter, or a family of any size going into the family shelter. So this dotted line that comes down the middle of the graph is when people get housed. And so for folks that are just using shelter, which is this top line, 88% of them left the shelter during this time frame, and only 16% of those folks that only went through the shelter got housed. Pre-pandemic, what we were looking at in terms of exits from shelter into housing was about 25 to 30%. So this has definitely gone down over the pandemic. And this is, here you can see that represents 112 households of the 720 households that exited. So 8% of people coming into emergency shelter are then transitioned into a rapid rehousing program. Less than 1% go to permanent supportive housing. This path into permanent supportive housing, just so you understand how the system works, more likely than not, people are sent to rapid rehousing and then to PSH. So you see this movement line here where they get housed with rapid and then move to permanent. Some of that is because rapid rehousing has more pre-housing services than PSH does. And then 3% of people move from an emergency shelter program to a transitional housing program. So with rapid rehousing, and this is some of what why I want you to see this data today. The average, here in this box, you see the split in the averages. So the dark purple is people who are in rapid rehousing and not in housing yet as of the end of this report. And the people in the gray half of the box are people who are in rapid rehousing and are housed at the end of this report. So the pre-housing, the average length of stay is 155 days. So this is reflective of what's happening in our housing market, that people who have a case manager, people who have the financial resources to pay rent, are taking an average of 155 days to move into housing, which is a hugely long length of time. And that's a huge shift from pre-pandemic. And then the average length of stay in the program once someone's been housed, this is not just post-housing, but their whole participation in the program is 346 days. So the exit rate from from rapid rehousing, with no other services is 64%. So right in the 3-4 years before the pandemic, the exit to permanent housing rate for this program was between 85 and 90%. And what we're seeing coming out of the pandemic is that's dropped down pretty significantly low. I see the same kind of concerns here with permanent housing. So we have in permanent housing, people are entering into the permanent supportive housing program, and there's an average of 346 days before they move into housing. These are people who have a voucher assigned to them.
Andrea, is that just, are those longer times a function of available or a lack of availability for affordable housing?
Yes, that's absolutely what's going on. And particularly with the PSH, it's not just, is there affordable housing, but is there affordable housing that will take a voucher? Or meets the habitability standards of the voucher. Now, the one thing I will point out, because it's important when you're looking at data to always see this, rapid rehousing, we're looking at 232 households. In PSH, we have 29 households. And then of those 29 households, only 12 of them wound up with move-in dates. And then coming out of that, we have 73% of the households getting housed. again, this is a program that typically has a 90-95% exit to permanent housing rate, because these are folks that have services, they have housing vouchers, and so they have the most intensive investment of our system in getting them housed, and we still can't find them housing.
Andrea,
Similar, you go ahead.
I'm sorry, what was the beginning number from last year when you talked about 1133 households going into the system? Was that the same number from last year, or is that an increased number?
I can pull that. I don't remember. That number hasn't changed significantly in the last couple of years.
Okay, all right.
It is, what I will tell you, it is lower than it was pre-pandemic. And it's lower than it was pre-pandemic because we're not seeing people move out of the system. So if we can't move people out, we can't move new people in.
Okay, so it's probably lower than, not higher than.
Right. So this number being lower is not necessarily a good sign.
Okay.
It is reflective of the fact that people are stuck here in this purple zone.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. But then even in transitional housing, again, this is a highly service enriched program. People are staying in it for an average of 243 days. I don't know honestly what that number is, because I don't keep that one in my head. But 81% are exiting. Only 24% of them are exiting into permanent housing. And so that's a pretty significant drop also for them. Typically this number's in the 60s. And then what you see of those people we get permanently housed. So this data is a little bit different. Of the people who entered into permanent housing in the 2 years prior to this time frame, 7% of them returned back to homelessness. So this does a 2-year look back. So of the people our system housed for 2 years, did any of them show up back in homelessness during this year? And it was taking about 127 days on average for them to return, which means for the most part, it was people we housed in the prior year that came back to homelessness. I think, Shrika, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's up a little bit, but our returns typically have been in the 5 to 7% range. So that hasn't necessarily shifted as much. So any questions about this system map?
So what's the overall consensus of what the map looks like now?
Yeah, I mean, I brought Trina and Shantae to join us today to talk a little bit about what they're seeing as case managers, and sort of what you see here is the data. What they're going to share with you is sort of the lived experience of what it is trying to house people right now. So let me turn it over to them for a little bit, and then I'll come back to your question.
I think we better maybe ask questions first. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah. So can we kind of just be asked certain questions and lead that way, and then it'll give us a flow? What type of question that'll work better, I think. Okay. So we can give examples or scenarios. Okay. So
why don't you, Shantae and Trina, if you can start first by introducing. Sorry, I should have introduced you better. Trina Brinkley is I don't even know your job title, but she's the
Director
case manager in chief at Bethesda Center. And Trina and Shantae Parker is also a case manager at Bethesda Center, working with our rapid rehousing programs. So
more permanent supportive housing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't you start by telling us some of the challenges that you've seen in the last year with trying to help people get housed?
Well, the lack of housing stock is definitely the number one factor. Just nowhere to go. Yeah, and also, I can't remember how detailed the inspection is for rapid rehousing, but I know if you have a PSH case, it has to go through the housing authority, and we have gotten feedback that sometimes the inspection can be really tedious, so they don't want to take the time. The landlords don't want to take the time to fix the things that need to be fixed to work properly. It's almost like too much of a hassle. Not saying that with rapid rehousing, that program requires less
It's
quality, but
We
it
use the
just,
same
It's the
standard.
same. We use the same
Okay.
inspection standards.
okay, but that has been the feedback from landlords. So I don't know if it's based on the system versus who's doing the inspection. I don't know. That's just the feedback. And then another challenging thing has been the feedback. The payments, they're not, the landlords
Payments.
are not pleased with the payments for the units. And so that's for permanent supportive housing. For rapid rehousing, they just don't like the way the tenants are maintaining the properties for the most part. They've had a lot of tenants to just kind of move other people in. So we've had those types of scenarios, or
So the complaints they've had about payments, was that about the amount of the payments or the timing of the payments? What was it specifically
the
about payment?
timing. The timing. I think there's like a 30, 45, 60-day delay in the processing of a housing authority payment for permanent supportive housing. Rapid payments are really not delayed as long as we have the documentation needed, which is the W-9, the HAP agreement, and the lease. But
Andrea, can you speak to why the payments take so long? Do you know?
From Haas, I cannot
Yes.
answer that. That one I cannot answer. United Way manages all the rapid rehousing ones, so I know what's happening in that system.
Okay.
I know with some of the cases I'm familiar with where there been payment problems. Sometimes we've had a couple of cases where the landlord never turned in their RFTA paperwork, which is what authorizes the housing authority to make the payment. So if they don't turn that back in, so we had and that particularly affects these clients here that are moving from rapid. So they'll move in with rapid, and United Way will make that first month payment and the security deposit and all of that. And then once that lease is signed and we know that it's passed the housing authority inspection, we'll stop payment for rapid rehousing because permanent supportive housing should pick up. But I would say in the last 3 months, I've had at least 2 tenants where the landlord never turned back in the paperwork to Haas to get paid. And then the landlord gets angry about that. If there's other problems internal at Haas, I'm not privy to those.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay.
And I will, the other thing that Trina and Shantae talked about was inspections. The rapid rehousing program and the permanent supportive housing program use the same inspection standard. The difference typically is because the rapid rehousing program is much smaller than the housing voucher programs for the housing authority. So the housing authority not just has PSH, but all their vouchers. We're doing like a few hundred a year and they're doing a few thousand a year. We can typically schedule an inspection as soon as we're like, if we know that an apartment is ready to be inspected, we could have someone out there in a day or two at most. Whereas with the housing authority, that process is slower. And then if our unit, like if we have a unit that fails inspection, we'll send our inspector back out within a day or two of being notified by the landlord that the repairs have been made. Whereas with the housing authority, that's typically at least a 30-day process. So
Yes, I think that, I'm glad you brought that up, Angela.
Yeah.
So I think that's what they're talking about when they talk about the inspection, because where the rapid rehousing program can turn around and send an inspector out. If a PSH client is waiting on a unit to be re-inspected, then they're going to go ahead, the landlord's going to go ahead and move with someone who doesn't have to go through that period. They can go ahead and start renting that unit out to someone who doesn't have to go through those channels.
In fact, we just received an email about that today, didn't we? Yeah, we have a tenant who is chronically homeless and who's been waiting for some time for his unit to be scheduled for inspection. And the property manager emailed us this afternoon to tell us that they haven't heard from the housing authority in terms of scheduling that inspection. And if they don't hear soon, because they've had so many other people waiting for the unit, that they're going to have to find this individual another unit.
This was a client who had already had an inspection and failed the inspection, and then they decided not to rent this client's unit to him at all. So we had to start all over again. Yes, this process.
And that's discouraging.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I am sure. And I've got a question about, you talked about the landlord-tenant relationship. And I wondered, I know with the IDA program and Habitat, there's a certain amount of education that takes place before they go into a new dwelling. Does that happen with these clients, guests?
Yes and no. And I will say that because we do like a surfaced, component with them to educate them, but it's not in full detail. I think the housing authority also does things with landlord tenants' rights, and we definitely make sure that they understand that and their fair housing. But in terms of
during their voucher
orientation, during their voucher orientation, they get that from the housing authority, but it's not probably as detailed as it could be.
Okay.
So when you talk about that, we had a guest who, and this doesn't have to do with PSH, but did not want to pay the landlord because things were not getting repaired in their unit. So, but because they were not educated on what to do in that situation, they just chose not to pay, and they ended up getting evicted. You know, so those little, not little, but those lessons definitely could go a long way with our community.
So the education piece is better when it's ongoing.
Okay.
Because most of the tenants, they don't really have the capacity to think like 6 months from now, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
It happens right then, and then they react right then. So that's why it's important for us to continue to maintain that continuum of care with them to help them get through those challenges when need arises.
So how long do they stay in your case management logs or files? Or how long?
As long as they keep the voucher. Yes.
As long as they have their voucher with permanent supportive housing, their case management is indefinite.
Okay.
For permanent supportive housing. For rapid rehousing, the maximum time period that they can receive case management is 24 months. So up to 24 months. And it just depends on the type of guests that we receive. We have some who are in a position who have rented before, so they're familiar with landlord-tenant relationships, paying bills on time and things of that nature. And then we have some who are first-timers who've never rented anything before, who don't know the first thing about responsibility and accountability. So it varies. It varies.
Yeah.
I've had some guests on my caseload for up to let's say 4 to 3 years, and I could say I had 3 of them that lost their housing during the pandemic because of their mental health. So when we were unable to do house visits, we communicated by phone. So everything did sound fine by phone. But when I was finally able, when the property manager contacted me and I was finally able to go inside the house to look, they had destroyed it because of, I think one of my guests had suffered from a schizophrenia affective. So just punching holes in the wall, just destroyed the unit, which kind of damaged one of the relationship with the landlords.
Sure.
Because of that issue.
Yeah.
So not being present during that time, I think, did affect some of our guests not having that constant that visual communication.
Right.
Yeah. And I think
Person.
that highlights another challenge that we're seeing in the system, which is it is a huge struggle for folks, particularly folks with severe and persistent mental illness, to access care. So while there are many things that are inside the scope of our housing case managers, and our housing case managers are equipped to help them sort of navigate access to mental health treatment, they are not actually treating the mental illness. And so, when we have a client like Shantae's with schizophrenia, if they don't have access to care, that complicates their housing situation if their illness isn't being managed.
Yes.
And so I think that's one of the other challenges we were seeing in the pre-pandemic. It got worse during the pandemic. And so we're just, coming out of the pandemic, very aware of the fact that we need to be building bridges. And I think there's also gaps in our system around care and mental health care in specific for folks who've been homeless and for folks with severe and persistent mental illness.
Okay.
Yes.
I guess my last question is about housing stock, and are most of your guests going into housing authority properties or private properties?
So PSH can't go in home.
So
I'm sorry?
permanent supportive housing guests, they can't go into a Hall's property. They would have to go into a landlord property. And for rapid rehousing guests, some of them are transitioning into income-based units, and which would limit the subsidy that Rapid could pay, or they are transitioning into market rate properties. So, but it's just so far and
so we have been utilizing the market rate properties, and we do have some wonderful landlords out there that are giving our guests our population, chance after chance after chance, and it's just, they get it, so they haven't given up on our community. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think, Cynthia, to your question, there's the properties that Hawes owns and manages outright, like Crystal Towers, like Sunrise. There's some, those are the two that always come to the top of my head. Then there's properties that are income based, but may not actually be owned by Hawes. So you can't see in this HUD data. We could probably try and figure out what percentage of our rapid rehousing clients are going into income-based properties. But they're hard to get in. I mean, they often have enormous waiting lists.
Yeah.
No, I was just trying, when Sharika talked about the survey that's coming out.
Oh, yep.
And the affordable housing issue.
Absolutely.
So I didn't know
how
we need to direct the city to address that issue.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I see in the data and what I'm also hearing from case managers is for people who have vouchers, finding an apartment that they can actually rent is really hard, right? So it's not, for them, it's not just about affordability. For them, it's about affordability and having a property that will accept a housing voucher. So there's, when you heard the city pass, we talked about the city passing the source of income discrimination. That's trying to address this problem, which is landlords discriminating against people who have vouchers as the source of income to pay their rent. And they do that in a couple ways. So one way is they just say, I don't take vouchers, right? Which at least that's upfront and honest about what's going on. The other way they do it is they say, we require every tenant to have 3 times the monthly rent in income. And so with a voucher holder, they're not going to have that, but they will have rent, if that makes sense. So that's one of the challenges we're seeing.
And for Winston-Salem, is it location specific, or are you seeing this all across the city?
The lack of housing or the lack of people taking vouchers, or both?
Lack of people taking vouchers.
It's everywhere. It's the whole city.
Okay. That's the whole city.
Yeah.
It's already.
I mean, I say it's the whole city. Most of the housing that is affordable to folks with vouchers sort of, I don't have the maps, but it sort of travels that same line where we see concentrations of poverty and we see up along 52. But even in the apartment complexes where we've been able to get people in the past that are, maybe in Clemens or on the west side of Winston, even we're having problems over there too.
Yeah, and then also you think about the transportation as well, because the bus routes have been reduced, so they only go to certain areas. So you might find an apartment that will take your voucher, but they're not on a bus line. So that's another thing. Transportation definitely plays a part in it.
Yeah. So.
And we've actually, I would say we've lost some of the landlords that we had maybe a couple of years prior, pre-COVID, because they, like, within the last year, decided that they no longer wanted to renew leases for guests that were receiving rapid rehousing. So they discontinued their lease, which forced those individuals to return to homelessness.
Even if they have a voucher, because Rapid pays for their utilities or something,
Yeah.
on there.
So, and we've had some landlords that just decided, no, we don't want any more, and just left the, tenant with no other option but to return to homelessness, because for one, that created a barrier for them even more, because Rapid will only pay for one security deposit within the 24-month time frame. So if we paid it for this landlord, if they were asked to leave the property a year later, they're still within 24 months, and the program could not pay another security deposit, application fee, things of that nature. So we lost some properties, quite a few.
And
So,
what's really frustrating in all of that is it was Rapid Rehousing and Permanent Supportive Housing that through the whole pandemic were actually paying rent, because tenants had these federal subsidies to pay rent. And so, what part of what feels really frustrating is this backlash against what was happening during the pandemic and the moratoriums. Like, it wasn't our program participants who were the source of the problems that landlords were having, but they're the ones that get the brunt of the landlord's anger by not accepting these programs anymore.
yeah. The market shifted and they shifted.
Yeah. So, any other questions about these exits?
It's really good information, and I appreciate what everyone is doing around this issue. So I appreciate you guys joining us and kind of giving some details around that. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
So I put up on the screen just so the commission members know sort of how we can visualize the data. This is the same data I showed you on that system map, just in different formats. So you can see different things in the data. So we talked about 24% of people coming into shelter exited to permanent destinations. What that breaks down to is 145 households of adult onlys, but only 19% of them were exiting to permanent housing. For the adult and child, we had 62 households enter, and 65% of them were exiting to permanent housing. So when we drilled down, looking at data differently, what we're seeing is the households with children have a much greater success at finding housing. That has always been true. Yeah, across our system, across everybody's system, that's not unusual. And then you can, like, here's just other ways to look at that. Same data. In this row of charts, the data that's sort of added in the visualization is this yellow graph, which is clients for whom we don't know where they're going. So you can see 8% of people who come into shelter leave, we don't know where they went. For families, that number is much lower because typically we know a lot more about families. We had a 2% unknown exit. And then this one's showing some trending lines. So you can see here, all household data is, I don't know why they're all variations on green. This line here is all households. So in 2020, this year, FY 2020 includes some non-pandemic data in it. We were at a 30% exit to permanent housing rate. And then we dropped down here in 2021, which would have been all pandemic. We're at 31% of all households exiting to permanent supportive housing. We just had a lot fewer households, right? So here we had, in 2021, we had 311 households. In 2021, we had just under 200 households. And then by 2022, similar number of households, but a 24% exit to permanent housing. So, any other questions about the exit to housing data?
Okay. All right. Thanks to everyone there.
Yeah.
All right,
So Andrea, I'll let you keep. I'm sorry, was there a
Okay.
question?
no, I was gonna tell Andrew I was gonna share my screen to pull up the veteran stuff.
Okay, cool. I stopped.
Well, okay, there you go.
Okay. So what you see here is coming from the VA Medical Center. The really exciting news is that the VA met the national challenge and housed the over 38,000 veterans. Looking at the South Salisbury VA Medical Center, so the medical center that we're a part of, our goal was 353, actually serves 362. So I know at the end of the last few months of the challenge, it was sort of nail biting, looking like we might not make it, but we locally did make that goal in helping get vets housed. I will say one of the things that changed is, and I think that really helped in our community in particular, it was that pre-October, we were using the fair market rents that were from 2021. So once we hit the 2022 fair market rents, the fair market rents that took effect in October of 2022, those rents went up $150 a month. And so all of a sudden in October we saw movement, and you won't see that data as a system until we get some of the system level data that includes October. But I think that's what made this goal happen in those last 3 months of the calendar year. So, and here you can see nationally the goal was 38,000 and they housed 41,760. So, any questions about that?
Good. Saw an article in the Wall Street Journal today saying that there's been continued progress on veteran homelessness, which is a positive, very positive.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Any other question on that topic? All right. Well, last thing I had, Andrea, was there were several issues that you were calling in the parking lot, so to speak. I think you wanted to provide an update on progress around those parking lot issues.
Yep. So a couple months ago, we created the parking lot for the continuum of care, where when issues come up at meetings, we can keep track of them so we don't lose them. So this is our COC parking lot. It's a very fancy spreadsheet. So these are the things that are coming up, and I wanted you all to see what's coming up. Again, strategies for affordable housing is coming up. The action camp is where we work with a lot of the case managers. So what's coming up for them are strategies for keeping people in housing. The online payment strategy is a technical thing that I hopefully are pretty close to working out. Advocacy is just how do we get information about the challenges that we're having as a COC out to the community so that we can have them addressed. And then the other thing, particularly coming from our homeless caucus, is development of tenant right strategies. And then a couple people not in a meeting, just other places, asked for domestic violence training. So I will give you occasional updates on what's happening with these issues that are coming up, but partially just so you can, as the commission, can see what's bubbling up across the continuum as challenges and problems.
I have
Maybe
a
one day somebody will
question.
put something good in the parking lot. Yes, Trina?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
With all the issues in the parking lot, it seems that it's either provider-based or tenant-based. When will we see some things being like landlord-based? Because without some changes being made by the property owners, there's always going to be something better for us to do, simply because there's no change on their end. There's no additional responsibility or accountability.
Yeah. So I hear you. So the technical answer to your question is, as soon as somebody brings it up in a meeting and we say we don't have time to talk about it today, it goes on this chart. But I think this development of a tenant rights strategy, a lot of that is, how do we help tenants have a more equal relationship in that landlord-tenant? North Carolina has some of the worst landlord-tenant laws from a tenant perspective in the country, in terms of tenants just have very little ability to protect their rights, right? So the landlords, some of it we talked about today. We didn't talk about Ladera Crest today, but right, it comes up in that context as well. When you sign the lease, the landlord's obligations are provide a habitable unit. And in many states, if the landlord doesn't keep their end of that bargain, the tenants actually have rights about how to address that. The only way tenants can address that in North Carolina is by suing their landlord in court. And so, there are strategies we could look at that would help hold the landlords more accountable. And then even in this advocacy area, some of that, again, will be about how do we educate the community? How do we educate landlords about their responsibilities? This literally is, as a COC, how do we make those issues heard better?
I don't know, Sharika's got a hand up, but
Okay.
Go ahead.
Trina, our COC is part of a landlord engagement strategy through HUD. So the community development department, we got some of our COC partners, as well as our City of Winston-Salem Human Relations Department. We are working with HUD on a landlord engagement strategies for the last year, and it goes for about another year. And in that meeting, we invite Karen Britton was really good about getting our landlords on the call. And it's from various cities across the country discussing the needs that the landlords are there to say what they need, and then also COCs and local governments on the call to talk and work that out. There are some roundtable sessions that HUD does as well for 6 weeks. They started January, I want to say the end of January, but there's roundtable discussions that happen around landlord engagement, unit acquisition, and how to better mend those relationships. So I'll definitely invite you to some of those. But I agree with you that there has to be accountability on both sides. And right now we take a lot of the grunt and give a lot of money and a lot of sweat equity, but we don't get a lot in return. So I definitely agree with you, but those talks are ongoing, and hopefully they'll end well.
Thank you.
And I guess my question was, did that address your question?
Yes.
Trina, was it? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I needed more clarification on the question. but I think I understood the answers. So maybe I.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Yeah.
And I think we all agree. I mean, really, we need a much bigger supply of affordable housing. And I know there's efforts underway outside of this group, but there's a special task force with that. Andrew, I know you gave an update recently, maybe in the last meeting, one of the last meetings, about a property that was soon to come online, maybe in a year or so. Any change on that, or any update on that?
No, I have not heard anything about, that was the Peters Creek initiative. I have not heard anything new about that. I don't expect that they're in another quiet, like, things are happening quietly phase. So.
But things are happening.
I'd like to see that Haynes Lawrence School turned into affordable housing property.
Yeah.
That's a big property.
Yep.
There are some things underway through the city. There's an RFP currently released for PSH housing that'll be built on Northwest Boulevard. There's also housing that's about to be built on Cobblestone and Leaner, which is in the Northwest Ward. And then there's a few other RFPs that'll be coming out looking for developers to build some additional housing as well.
Good.
I hope it's going to be enough units, Tamika, and not just a little bit here and a little bit there.
Based on the lots, that we can't build so much. So as lots continue to become available and we continue to find and buy lots, we'll continue to build.
Okay, but
we are still looking. So
yeah.
Andrea knows I've been looking for lots, and then we do have the 100 units where we're doing a hotel conversion that'll be online.
Yeah.
So
I think
PSH units as well.
Yeah, I think from the PSH, the permanent housing perspective, that hotel conversion will bring on a big chunk of units at one moment, which will be good. And it's, I mean, as with a lot of development, it's a little bit here, a little bit there, add up over time. I think I've mentioned this before. I've looked at sort of the affordable housing investments in the city of Vienna from post-World War II to now. And their affordable housing supply is like unimaginable from our perspective and where we sit. But it's because every year since World War II, they have been adding to that supply and they upkeep it, right? So that what they're putting into the supply stays in the supply. So one thing we haven't talked a lot about, and if you're interested, I can try and get someone to come and talk about it, is, so in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of investment at the federal level in local income-based housing projects that had 30-year sunsets, right? So a lot of those properties are now coming out of their 30-year affordability period, and they're being bumped up to market rate. And so we're losing housing supply that was affordable. So the difference between an affordable housing rate would be the fair market rate that HUD is required, which is about $850 for a single unit right now, and market rate, which is about $1,200 a unit now. And you know, for our client, for any of the households, you know, where they are living paycheck to paycheck, that $400 difference a month just on rent alone is huge. So, and then, you know, the other sort of drain on supply that we have is when we have property owners who are really using the property as sort of a cash cow for themselves, and they're not reinvesting in the upkeep and maintenance of that property in the way that it should be. We're losing properties to condemnation and habitability issues. So
Jennifer's had her hand up for a minute.
oh, okay, thanks. Jennifer?
Hey, thank you. I had a question about the code enforcement department at the city. I raised this at the forum on violence, and Councilwoman Burke is aware of blight and has reviewed the data about the environmental causes of crime. But what that department is for, I don't think we're maximizing, so that the onus is not on the tenant, but the city be more proactive with the inspection of rental housing units. And that way the tenant is not making a complaint. It's the enforcement of routine inspections that are happening. So I don't know if there's a way to access it, the code department, and ask them to inspect certain units or increase random inspections of what would be classified as low income units, because I think a lot of these people do get bonuses and incentives. I heard someone say we're giving a lot of money and not getting a lot of bang for our buck. And that way you take the tenant complaining out of the equation. It's just an inspection. And for the Halls property, when you're a Halls runner or a landlord, you get an inspection at least once a year.
Mhm.
And so I don't know if we could perhaps turn to the city to increase their involvement in code enforcement. Some basic living necessities are not being provided from what I understand. Is that something we've thought about before? Is there anybody we can get to come to a meeting or explain code enforcement to us or the frequency of inspections?
I can ask, but the way code enforcement works is through 311 City Link. So you request someone to come and inspect the unit there. Through HUD funding, we should be inspecting our units when we put people in them. So that is a requirement for our funds that we utilize, which is separate, to make sure that the units are habitable and taken care of.
And y'all are doing your part, but what I was wondering is, why does it have to come through 311 if we know the people own property? Why doesn't the department check on it periodically?
So once again, I'll relay your message to code enforcement, but that is the process that it goes through CityLink. And
Yeah.
that may be because it's so many that they manage and so few of them. So that could be a reason, but I will let code enforcement speak to that.
Yeah.
And I would like to know how many they actually have inspected. And then perhaps as the advocates start making a call through 311, if that's a requirement. Because I do think there's a lot of retaliation that occurs and people are afraid to raise the issues when it's not being cared for.
Yes, we've encouraged case managers to use that as well. So they are welcome to submit that as well.
Thank you.
So I think, Jennifer, I think that's a really important train for us to follow. So you'll see, I put it in the parking lot. And we'll see if we can get some folks from code enforcement to come and talk to us about why their processes are the way they are, and what it would take to have a better partnership with us around this issue. I think, I absolutely agree, the retaliatory evictions against clients make it very challenging for tenants to be the ones to call in for code enforcement. But even like with our work at Ladera Crest, what we're seeing is when the habitability issues are so bad and the city comes in and inspects, so we did that for a couple of our rapid rehousing tenants and their issues. The city condemned the unit and now the client's homeless. So some of it is trying to catch those violations before it becomes such a health issue that the unit gets condemned. That's just a strategy and fine line kind of a thing, but it's more than just the landlord retaliation that puts the client at risk.
Robert's got his hand up.
Yep.
Go
Robert?
ahead.
Yeah, on the tenant rights thing,
Yep.
I find it bizarre that it took as long as it did for me to get my inspection cleared this last round. I had a fairly simple, okay, it was my AC unit had to be swapped out. it took 3 months total to get that swapped out. And it's not like my landlord didn't know that that unit was dead. And that's a hard fail on an inspection.
Yeah,
Now, I realize there are some more severe issues, but still relatively simple. The guy took maybe 45 minutes total because he could grab a hot swap from another unit. But why?
yeah, no, those are great questions. I cannot explain that at all, but I can put it in the parking lot and try and bring Haj to the table to talk with us about those challenges.
Good questions. Big challenges, good questions. We wish we had simple answers. All right. Anything else on this topic, Andrea?
Just one quick question, Andrea.
Yeah.
The number 8, the development of tenants' rights. Is this going to use the White House blueprint for Renters' Bill of Rights that just came out, or is it going to combine that as well as local strategies?
The truth of the matter is, this was put in the parking lot, and so I can put in this next steps that there is a White House. You can all watch how bad a speller I am. So we could bring that information to the operating cabinet and the caucus, which is where this is coming from, and talk about next steps with that. So I think that's great. So. Any other questions, ideas, thoughts? So we'll keep this parking lot kind of parts of meeting. We won't always spend this much time like looking at the parking lot, but we'll make sure that you see the parking lot and see the issues that are coming up. But also, you know, if we have issues that need to go in the parking lot, we're going to start using it as a way to track what's coming up and how we're addressing it. So if that's all that, this has been a fantastic discussion today. I appreciate everyone's time with us today. And look forward to our March meeting.
Yeah, March.
Sorry, I've totally lost track of time.
It feels like April already, so I understand.
I know.
All right. Well, anything else from anyone on the call? Anything we need to bring up while we're grouped together that we haven't discussed? All right. Well, let me thank everyone again for all the work that's going into this. Like I said, big challenges. Wish we had simple answers, but we do make progress where we can, and we have to celebrate successes where we can, like with veterans, like seeing progress there. That's good. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, we can adjourn today's meeting, and we will regroup in about 30 days.
Sounds great. Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Bye-bye.